truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ruby Barlow and you're watching The World Report. Let's take a look at our top stories of this hour. President Donald Trump has warned that the latest round of negotiations with Iran is the last chance to bring an end to the 5-month conflict. Trump told reporters in the Oval Office that talks are going on right now at the request of Iran, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and others. However, Tehran continues to deny that any direct negotiations with the US are taking place, or that there are plans to hold them in the future. Qatar, Egypt and Turkey, which are mediating the truce in Gaza, on Monday criticised Israel after renewed strikes in the Palestinian territory reportedly killed over 20 people. The trio said they strongly condemned what they said were ongoing Israeli violations in the Gaza Strip, particularly the targeting of health facilities and infrastructure. Lebanon and Israel are set to begin a new round of US-sponsored direct talks in Rome as Beirut seeks Israel's phased withdrawal from the country's south. At negotiations in Washington in June, Israel and Lebanon agreed to a framework deal that involves the disarmament of Hezbollah and a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon's south. 25 states sued the Trump administration Monday over its latest tariffs, calling them a pretext for replacing import taxes, the Supreme Court struck down in February. The United States last month imposed double-digit tariffs on 59 countries and the European Union, charging that they had not done enough to crack down on imports produced by forced labour. The event in New Delhi, where Bangladesh's former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is due to speak, is being organised by a private entity and the Indian government has nothing to do with it, India's Foreign Ministry spokesperson has said today. Bangladesh had asked New Delhi to clarify its stance on Hasina's planned virtual address at the August 5th event hosted by the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia, marking the second anniversary of the student-led uprising that toppled her government. Wildfires raging on the outskirts of Spokane, Washington for a third day have destroyed at least 700 buildings and forced tens of thousands of people to flee their homes. The cluster of 3 blazes ranked as the top firefighting priority in the US as a whole, including the drought-parched Pacific Northwest, where dozens of major wildfires have burned for weeks, degrading air quality across a wide region. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung urged authorities to step up support for people affected by a record heatwave, calling it a national disaster after scorching conditions were blamed for 19 deaths. Speaking at a cabinet meeting, Lee ordered officials to take necessary measures. Israeli forces have killed 2 Palestinians in an attack on Gaza City despite the October ceasefire, while Qatar, Egypt and Turkey issue a joint statement condemning the attacks on the Strip. We begin with our top story today. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei announced during a press conference in Tehran that current discussions concerning a temporary safe shipping route in the Strait of Hormuz are being conducted directly with Oman rather than with the United States. Baghei stated that the waterway's disruption stems from recent military actions and maintained that direct bilateral negotiations with Washington are not taking place, adding that regional security should be handled through local cooperation. Meanwhile, the United States Central Command reported that its ongoing maritime blockade has strictly enforced restrictions, resulting in 44 commercial vessels being redirected, 2 disabled and 2 boarded in the critical waterway. Adding to the escalation, Mohsen Rezai, a top military advisor to Iran's supreme leader, warned that Tehran will not tolerate any effort to establish shipping lanes outside those designated by Iran, stating that US warships along unauthorized routes would be treated as targets. Rezai also noted that the future of a previously signed Memorandum of Understanding hangs in the balance following recent strikes targeting military facilities in the region, raising the stakes for commercial navigation and diplomatic engagement amid ongoing hostilities. Let's listen in to what Ismail Beghei has said.
که شرارت آمریکا ادامه پیدا بکنه، مادامی که محاصره دریایی ایران ادامه داشته باشه، تجاوز نظامی آمریکا علیه ایران و منافعش تداوم داشته باشه، مادامی که همه مواردی که آمریکا در این مدت نقض کرده نقضهاش ادامه داشته باشه، قاعدتاً در وضعیت تنگه هرمز اتفاق خاصی، تغییر خاصی نخواهد افتاد. لذا تمرکز مذاکرات با عمان در مورد تنگه هرمز خواهد بود. موضوعاتی که مربوط میشه به ایران و آمریکا باید در مراحل بعدی ببینیم که اوضاع احوال به چه سمت و سویی خواهد رفت.
Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio responded to the ongoing maritime stalemate by announcing that progress has been achieved in separate diplomatic channels involving Oman and Iran to ensure safe short-term passage for commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. Speaking to reporters at the State Department during the signing of a nuclear cooperation pact with Paraguayan Foreign Minister Ruben Ramirez Lezcano, Rubio noted that while finality has not yet been reached, the United States expects a resolution very shortly as part of broader efforts to stabilize regional trade. Rubio emphasized that the ongoing talks run parallel to strategic objectives aimed at securing the critical choke point for global commerce, even as naval enforcement and regional tensions persist. Diplomats continue to assess the feasibility of proposed Omani-mediated arrangements, balancing immediate commercial shipping requirements with long-term security talks in the Middle East. Let's now look into what Marco Rubio has said.
You know, there are ships moving through the straits. There's oil moving right now through the straits, so the straits are open. Nonetheless, I think that there's a conversation and negotiation that we are involved in between Oman and Iran on how more ships can be able to go through there safely in the short term as we move towards these longer term talks about denuclearization. And suffice it to say, there's been progress made in those talks, but not finality yet. We're hoping that will happen very shortly.
We are now joined by Ali Hussein Guluzada, who's a geopolitical risk analyst of the South Caucasus and Iran regions. He's joining us now from Baku, Azerbaijan. Ali Hussein, thanks very much for joining with us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us on NewsX World. Now, we are seeing perhaps some confusing statements coming to us. Marco Rubio saying that they are involved in some aspect in these talks between Iran and Oman. The Iranian side saying that these talks are strictly between those two countries. The focus has been on the Strait of Hormuz for many, many months now. What are you making of these statements?
Thank you very much. I want to say that firstly, Rubio's statements reflects first Washington's dual logic. For example, on the one hand, to demonstrate the domestic audience and allies that diplomacy is working, and the other, they avoid talking on political commitments until the documents are signed by Trump and approved by the Iranian leadership, for example. Yeah. It's important to understand that this concerns a multi-layered package. The question is not opening or the blockade of Hormuz. The issue is more wider. For example, the functioning of freedom of navigation, passing discussion of the nuclear program in the next stage, and the partial unfreezing of Iranian assets. Therefore, the progress in Rubio's rhetoric is more of an agreed outline of a framework plan than a final statement. In the context of an ongoing conflict, the United States trying to show that it controls the situation while simultaneously leaving room for hard options if the talks collapse. We can, for example, refer to Trump's statement from yesterday. That's my point now.
Mm-hmm. Ali Hussein, when you look at the scenario that we are seeing, the fact that the MOU has kind of been in the balance for the last couple of weeks, the fact that Iran and Oman actually are heading into these discussions, do you think that there is a scenario that could be possible where Iran at least has some sort of control over the Strait of Hormuz, perhaps in the next couple of weeks or next couple of months? How do you think the Americans would take this, even as the fact that it is potentially one of the previous red lines before this war did start.
Yes, it's a good point. Personally, I always said that I will not surprise if United States may compromise against Iran in the context of function of Strait of Hormuz. And during the latest news, for example, in American outlets, under the deal currently being discussed between Iran and Oman, separate talks, of course, Iran would control all inbound traffic through the Strait of Hormuz using a corridor in Iranian territorial waters and charge fees for maritime transit services. So inbound traffic would use a road near Oman, but Iran would still oversee the passage of vessels and retains the right to intervene if necessary. And there another indicator, also latest indicators from Saudi media outlets that say to us that intensive discussions are underway to advance the issue of the Strait of Hormuz. And the statement on this matter may be made in the near future. Don't mix it with direct United States-Iranian talks. There are no yet direct talks. But it's a question, everything is happening in the context of separate Iran-Omanian talks about further functioning of Hormuz Strait. And yes, a memorandum of understanding was damaged, but I always said that diplomacy not over. And yes, Iran could take charge Strait of Hormuz because we can see obvious principality for Iran, not in the historical context, but also modern policy prestige.
Mm-hmm. Ali Hussein, there is of course the additional context of the feasibility of this proposed Omani mediated arrangements. Now there is this context of the geopolitical risk, the fact that the Gulf will be looking at these negotiations very closely, and of course the fact that it does have a massive effect on commercial markets worldwide with linkages to energy resources. Now, how do you think that we might see this agreement play out indeed? How do you think it might affect some of those relations with some of those Gulf countries? Do you think the Gulf countries would actually use this potential Iran-Oman operated Strait of Hormuz agreement? Would they look for other shipping arrangements, especially since a lot of those countries have also been under attacks from Iranians over the last couple of months? How do you think it could play out in terms of regional geopolitics?
Yes, generally there are two scenarios: diplomatic solving the problem, and risk scenario is war. I mean, large-scale military operation, renewing large-scale military operation by United States against Iran, and especially we can hear yesterday that Trump also pushed this such kind of scenario, and he said that about decapitation of Iranian top leadership or something like that, and it's a real scenario. But about other issues, and especially Oman, I think Oman is acting as a classical mediator between the parties. Muscat simultaneously coordinates with Washington and conducts direct technical talks with Tehran on the temporary corridor in cooperation with the International Maritime Organization. The Sultanate has announced the creation of temporary northern and southern roads that allow vessels to be gradually and controllably withdrawn from the high-risk zone in the Strait of Hormuz without any fees being charged. According to the Iranian side, talks between Tehran and Muscat have already entered the final stage and are focused on agreeing a single intermediate route that would run partly through Iranian and partly through Omani waters, the so-called northern and southern sectors. And for Oman, this is an first opportunity to strengthen this image as a natural mediator, while for the United States, it's a way to link the technical solution on shipping to the broader memorandum with Iran without recognizing Tehran's right to control an international way. About energy, the market, and so on, before the war, roughly 1/5 of the world's oil and liquid gas exports passed through Hormuz. So the effective closure of the strait, inevitable, which is what is a risk scenario, led to price spikes and an increase in the risk premium in the region. And I'm not sure that Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia and Dubai, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, wants to escalation again. And I think they accept current condition if Oman and Iran will sign this agreement, de facto agreement about functioning Strait of Hormuz.
Ali Hussein Guluzada, thank you very much for joining with us today on NewsX World. An absolute pleasure to speak with you. Now, Qatar has accused Israel of delaying the implementation of a Gaza peace plan, saying disagreements over key commitments are blocking progress towards a deal. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman Majid Al-Ansari said the international community can identify the party responsible for obstructing the agreement, placing the blame on Israel. The remarks came after US President Donald Trump said Hamas had agreed to disarm as part of the proposed framework for ending the Gaza conflict. However, Israel has maintained that it will not fully withdraw from Gaza unless security guarantees are in place, including the complete dismantling of Hamas's military capabilities. Qatar, along with Egypt and the United States, has been playing a key mediating role in negotiations between Israel and Hamas. The dispute highlights the major challenges facing efforts to implement a ceasefire and establish a long-term political arrangement in Gaza. While mediators continue pushing for progress, disagreements over troop withdrawals, Hamas's future role and security arrangements remain the biggest obstacles to a final agreement. Let's listen in.
We can confirm that the efforts are still ongoing with all the parties. We are looking towards diplomatic resolution as we are speaking right now. As you know, there are current efforts on the ground that are in very progressive stages, and we are working with all the parties to see this effort. So I can confirm that the efforts are ongoing as we speak. To you on that. Regarding if Israel should withdraw, let me state it very clearly. We think Israel should withdraw from all land that it occupies in adherence to international law. This occupation cannot be justified by any current or past security situations, and therefore them withdrawing from Gaza is a simple fact under international law that cannot be argued against. Now,
we're now joined by Dan Perry, who's the former editor-in-chief of the Associate Press's Europe, West Asia and Africa regions. He's in Tel Aviv. Dan, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks very much for joining us today. Now, what do you make of these statements from the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman Majid Al-Ansari? He said that the international community needs to step up, and he has also said that Israel is delaying the implementation of the Gaza peace plan. Your thoughts on some of his statements?
My thoughts are that the main sticking point in implementing the Gaza peace plan was that Hamas never really accepted the critical point, which was that it would fully, irreversibly disarm and give up control over Gaza. And everything that we're seeing since then is more or less a function of that. Now, the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman is technically right that Israel is holding up the current stage because Israel hasn't confirmed that it agrees, basically. So that's kind of indisputable. Is Israel right in maintaining this position? It's a mixed bag, because the original 20 or 21-point plan called for Israel to withdraw from all of Gaza, but also called for Hamas to disarm, and didn't really establish the order of events. So Israel's position that it cannot withdraw from effectively the buffer zone around what remains the Hamas-controlled interior of Gaza until Hamas is no longer a threat, I don't see that as ridiculous at all. Israel's basic position is that they need to stay until Hamas is fully disarmed. The idea presented by the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesman that Israel should just withdraw no matter what from all occupied areas is absolutely preposterous. I mean, Hamas really has the intention of attacking Israel, so they clearly need a buffer zone as long as Hamas is there. Hamas's presence as a threat to Israel, not theoretical but highly kinetic threat, is the reason for the entire devastating, catastrophic 3 years of the war. And so I think Israel's right in insisting that Hamas first be disarmed. Unfortunately, the situation becomes more complicated still because Israel objects to certain modalities about the Hamas disarming. For example, it looks like the agreement that they have reached is Hamas handing over heavy weapons, maybe all weapons, not clear, but heavy weapons into depots that will stay in Gaza. Israel wants these weapons removed from Gaza and destroyed. And also, Israel doesn't want anything remaining in the hands of Hamas, not pistols and not a slingshot. So, is Israel right or wrong to be so suspicious? Are these quibbles? That starts to become a bit of a gray zone. In general, Qatar is an interesting case because undoubtedly they have been a mediator and they've tried to play a mediator role, but they've also been strong supporters of Hamas. And they are rightly suspected of having pro-Hamas sympathies. Now, you could argue at the same time that the U.S. is a supporter of Israel and has pro-Israel sympathies. And one is left with the fundamental question, are Israel a democratic country facing threat? And Hamas, a terrorist organization, an enemy to its own people, constituting the threat, are they equivalent forces morally? And obviously that's a huge discussion that animates much of the political discourse in the West. I have my view, and it favors Israel over Hamas.
Dan, stay with us. We will be rejoining with you very briefly. Spain has described European Union talks on the migration crisis in Ceuta as constructive, rejecting claims that the dispute put the Schengen-free travel area at risk. Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska said Schengen was never in danger and insisted that the situation had not threatened Spain's place within the border-free zone. The emergency meeting brought together EU interior and migration ministers after several countries, including Italy and Denmark, criticised Madrid's handling of the Ceuta migration crisis. During the discussions, member states expressed solidarity with Spain while also calling for stronger control of the European Union's external borders. Ministers agreed on the need for a tougher approach against illegal migration, greater cooperation with countries of origin, and more support for border agency Frontex. Belgium also called for increased resources for border security and stronger action against human smugglers. The meeting ended with EU members seeking a balance between supporting frontline countries and strengthening Europe's migration controls. Let's listen in to what Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska has said.
Volviendo al Consejo High que hemos celebrado, extraordinario, referir cómo todas las intervenciones de todos los Estados miembros, también de los Estados asociados a Schengen, así como de las agencias de la Unión Europea, ha sido en un tono absolutamente constructivo, en un tono donde se ha reconocido igualmente el trabajo extraordinario, la respuesta eficaz e inmediata de las autoridades españolas ante una crisis de tal entidad.
Dan, coming back to you now, we have seen, of course, the last couple of events over the past couple of days unfold and the reaction that this has led to within the leadership in the EU. Now, from a policy perspective, is there anything the EU can do to perhaps reduce some of those push factors that are leading to the migration of people out of some of those countries when the pull factors are so strong in terms of employment prospects in the EU? Regardless of humanitarian reasons, some of these migrants have cited that they were looking for better employment opportunities in parts of the EU. How do you think the EU should best manage their response to the implications of the last couple of days?
That's the question of the hour and the question of the century. The EU has to weigh how it views a fundamental trade-off. There is no doubt that the European Union does not have replacement level fertility rates. Replacement level is 2.1 per woman. They're flirting with 1.3, in some countries 1.4. So the population is going to shrink. The proportion of old people and pensioners is going to increase. Workers paying taxes is going to decrease. The countries will be poorer unless they either massively and quickly increase their fertility or they bring in workers from outside. But then the question becomes, do you value your existing culture? If you bring in people from other cultures, then, you know, Spain will no longer be Spain. It'll be something else, Japan maybe. Does Spain want to be Japan? Does Spain want to be Arabia? It's not so clear. Now, the far left in all these countries will say that borders are fundamentally wrong and they're archaic relics of nationalism, and that the idea of preserving your culture is inherently racist. They confuse race for ideas because the immigration all over Europe comes largely from Muslim countries where demonstratively, indisputably, basic attitudes towards gays, towards women, towards religion and the centrality of religion, towards liberal values is clearly different and sometimes dramatically and violently at odds with the liberal democratic values that prevail in Europe that stem back to you know, the Renaissance and hail from Enlightenment values. Do you want to give those up in order to satisfy an economic need and a labor market need? This is the fundamental thing. And that really is a choice. Now, when the Americans associated with the MAGA movement, President Trump and J.D. Vance, start accusing Europe of being willing to give up their own civilization, they're a little bit behind the times, and they're not so fair, because whereas Europe really did have something close to extremely liberal, not open borders, but very liberal attitudes towards letting in immigrants from the developing world 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, they no longer do. Europe has put up a very big fence, basically. The issue of Spain is interesting because Spain has the only land border with mainland Africa and Ceuta and Melilla, these enclaves that occasionally face so-called invasion by Moroccans and others, and therefore is vulnerable. But the idea that once you reach Ceuta or Melilla, you simply can enter Europe because you're going to get asylum and that's it. Schengen means you can go anywhere or end up in Paris is basically false, because they're not part of the Schengen zone, and Spain has no intention of giving everyone Spanish citizenship. They really were vulnerable, and they were treated, I think, rather harshly in recent days when all of Europe ganged up against them. On the other hand, it's also true that Spain currently has a left and even far left government of Pedro Sanchez that has been way more liberal than the rest of Europe in this regard. For example, by offering essentially asylum to illegals in Spain, and they thought that would apply to 500,000 earlier this year. It ended up attracting applications from well over 1 million, and they probably mostly, if not all, actually suffice to be accepted. And those people really can proceed straight to Frankfurt or you know, the rest of the EU because of Schengen. So there's a very big issue here. Spain is a bit of an outlier in this regard, not because of Ceuta, where most of the people who breached the border have been returned, and there was never a real danger that they end up in mainland Spain, but in general, because of the fact that the Sanchez government, I think, is inclined, when it comes to the trade-off I mentioned before, to break on the side of the labor market need, and it's no big deal, and you know, diversity is always good. And I do not think that this applies across the board in terms of public opinion in Europe. And if Europe actually does follow that lead, I'm pretty sure the result is going to be far-right movements coming to power in Germany, France, and also Britain, even though Britain's no longer part of the EU.
Dan, always a pleasure to have you with us on NewsX World. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now we also move to another development coming out of Europe. Speaking during a visit to the Paks nuclear plant, Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar offered a note of cautious optimism, stating there is light at the end of the tunnel following days of critical concern. The Paks facility, which normally generates roughly 40% of Hungary's electricity, was forced to slash operations to a fraction of its capacity after water levels in the Danube River plunged to historic lows, severely compromising the plant's reactor cooling systems. Meteorologists and river experts are now forecasting significant rainfall in the Austrian catchment area of the Danube by Thursday, which is expected to finally push river levels back up later this week. While the Prime Minister Magyar has warned that critical days still lie ahead and energy conservation remains vital, Authorities assured the public that broader power supplies are currently being stabilised through emergency imports and regional coordination as they await much needed natural relief. Meanwhile, let's listen in to what the Hungarian Prime Minister has had to say.
Budapesten jelenleg stagnál. Egyeztettünk ma már a vízügy vezetőivel, akik egyeztetnek a szlovák, az osztrák vízügyesekkel, egyeztettünk a meteorológiával, és mindenki azt várja, hogy valamikor csütörtök környékén egy várhatóan nagyobb mennyiségű eső eshet az osztrák vízgyűjtő területeken, de hát erre azt mondják a meteorológusok is, meg a vízügyesek is, hogy még a felhőben van a csapadék, úgyhogy az még egyáltalán nem biztos, hogy a Dunába be is kerül.
That's all we have time for today. Stay tuned on NewsX World for more news and updates.